our citizens free education from the primary to the university levels, and ensure that this education is spread in all over the regions of our continent and of our country. We must remove the obstacles to education. The feminine population represents 50.2%. There are still cultural obstacles. There are obstacles to the education of girls. We must concentrate on valorizing our human resources. And then we have fertile land. What are we doing with this fertile land? We are still in many countries using very archaic agriculture. It is time to begin to develop an agriculture that I would call modern. It does exist in many countries. Look, for example, at a country such as Rwanda. Tea and coffee are actually, there's value added locally. Countries such as Ghana, countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, cocoa is transformed locally. Now, these raw products that we sell without adding value, we must be able to add value locally so that we can increase the wealth and also create employment. The transformation of agricultural products is a priority. So today, agriculture in many countries uses biotechnology. It uses the drip system. It uses seeds that are modified, that are quality seeds. Ethiopia uses quality seeds in order to be able to produce maize. Today, Ethiopia produces maize and wheat because of these seeds that are quality seeds. It is important to think about transforming agricultural product in place that will ensure that the people can get out of food insecurity, ensure that there is a specialized agriculture. There has to be areas of specialized agriculture, and that, I would say, is one of the steps that will lead to ensuring that this world there can be at the benefit of the population. And then we come to natural resources. I acknowledge the work by President Museveni. He has said that he will not export petrol or gas exporters. Let me talk about tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. That is not the problem. I think that the situation must be to, first of all, protect our wealth by transforming them locally. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf.
Of round one, where I'm happy to announce we have a 5-minute break, and after this break we come to round two. You have been tuned in to us here from the African Union headquarters here in Addis Ababa, and we are bringing to you Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024 with our 3 esteemed candidates vying for the position of chairperson of the African Union.
Merci infiniment, cher candidat.
Thank you very much, candidates, for having answered to the first question of the first round. Ladies and gentlemen, there's still 3 rounds to go in which you will all participate. And we're going to take a break of 5 minutes. We'll come back immediately after. Thank you very much for having listened to us. Thank you.
Gender development, youth empowerment, and employment generation for youth and women. Social security and protection for all people, and infrastructural development. Good governance supported by capable institutions. Industrialization. Promotion of culture, arts and sports. Peace and security.
Okay. Maintenant,
let us unite to build the Africa we want. Visit www.au.int to learn more about Agenda 2063.
CADEP, it is the flagship program. It is the all-food system that exists for us to implement and make sure that all our citizens on the continent have access to affordable, safe, and available food.
It is difficult to talk about agricultural transformation when we have to rely extensively on extremely subsistence kind of
Mesdames et messieurs, veuillez vous rasseoir, s'il vous plaît. Nous allons reprendre le débat dans quelques instants. Merci beaucoup.
We're going to reconvene in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
4 seconds to go to start round 2 of the debate. Please take your seats kindly. Ladies and gentlemen, now 35 seconds to go, and please make sure that kindly when you take your seat, your phones remain on silent as previously requested. Washrooms are to the back of the stage. We kindly ask for minimal movement when our candidates are on stage, and please keep your applause and your gestures for the appropriate time.
Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue encore une fois parmi nous.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome yet once again to Mjadala Africa debate direct from the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. We're very happy to work with you this afternoon as moderators of this debate. For those who have just joined us, I'd like to remind you that just a few minutes ago we listened to answers to the first round of questions with their excellencies, Mr. Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Djibouti, His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister of Kenya, and finally Honorable Richard Randriamandrato, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Madagascar. And we're coming right back to the second round of questions. Anita.
About to start the round 2 of our debate here, Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate, where we are witnessing and listening to 3 esteemed candidates, each vying for the chairperson position of the African Union Commission. Earlier on, we heard their thoughts on issues such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, and now we're moving into the second round. And if you're just joining us, we're beaming live from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa to be specific.
Et pour ouvrir le deuxième round, mesdames,
To start the second round, ladies and gentlemen, honorable participants, we're going to open a second envelope so that we can see the question that was prepared by an independent panel for this debate. Let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that the questions were drafted in two languages, in French and then in English. So, Your Excellencies, the candidates, your question is this. In spite of the hopes of the African Union to silence the arms between now and 2030, the conflicts continue to take place. How would you go about proposing African solutions so that you can ensure that there is a prevention, management, and a resolution that are effective and sustainable of conflicts? And how would you accelerate the advance of Africa towards a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council? That's your question.
Whose aspiration to silence guns by 2020, conflicts persist. How will you foster African solutions to ensure effective and durable conflict prevention, management, and resolution? And how do you plan to accelerate Africa's push for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council? Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed candidates, the first to answer this round of questions will be His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga. You have 4 minutes, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Well, silencing the guns on the continent. As you know that in 2013, the AU met and passed a resolution to silence the guns by 2020. We are today in 2024, and the guns are not silent. They're very loud, roaring all over the continent. We need to address the causative factors of these conflicts. There are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that our African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example, in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have got exclusions of people, and as a result of this, there's some people move to use other means. We need to find a way of creating an environment of dialogue within our societies so that we can be able to prevent these differences, conflict ending up into violent confrontation between the various groups. We don't need to put a time span, but I'm sure that it is possible to end these conflicts and stop the guns by 2035, in my view. The other one is the issue of Africa's representation on the Security Council. This is something that has been long overdue. As you know, that the UN was formed at a time when most parts of Africa were colonies. And that's why the UN structure as today does not deal with the realities of the world today. And the situation where you have 5 countries sitting in the Security Council with veto powers, and Africa is not represented, a continent with 1.4 billion people, is not tenable and it's not accessible. And that's why I'm not going to talk about Africa's representation, but we're going to insist that Africa must get 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council. This is only fair, because we are a continent of 55 sovereign nations. We cannot be excluded when Europe has got 3 permanent representations on the Security Council. Permanent representation with the veto powers is a must for Africa. And this I'm going to insist when I'm elected, if the heads of state of Africa sees fit that I should lead this. I will work together with all the leadership of the continent to ensure that the continent gets a fair treatment on the international scene.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya. Et maintenant, mesdames et messieurs.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf.
Silencing the Guns is a flagship program, one of the 15 that our leaders have endorsed years ago. And then they put a number of mechanisms and structure around this flagship program so that peace becomes a reality on our continent. The first structure is the African Peace and Security Architecture. And then we have the strategy that we all know, Silencing the Guns. And to support this strategy, the African Union put in place a number of mechanisms. One of them is the Peace and Security Council. The other one is the Committee of Elders, the Committee of Chief of Staff. We have the Peace Fund, and we can rely on every kind of mechanism. So why is peace is not, let's say, a reality on the ground on our continent? There are a number of reasons. One of them is the political will of countries. We have to be outspoken and frank. We make decisions at the Peace and Security Council level. These decisions are not implemented. Our Peace and Security Council is not proactive. It is reacting to crises when they occur and happen. This has to change. And I'm sending a message to our member countries saying this has to change. The number 2 problem that we have to face is our standby forces. We have them on the papers. Of course, sometimes we can mobilize them, but they lack resources. We are still relying on foreign partnership for our resources. Let me give you an example. AMISOM. Since 2007, AMISOM has been financed by the European Union and the United Nations, up to 2.7 billion euros. Now, financial resources are critical. Why should we have the money so that we can operate on crisis ground on the continent? Because without money, we cannot deploy our standby forces. Without money, even the committee of mediators cannot go and discuss with the stakeholders. They sometimes wait for the tickets, the per diems, days and days and days. It's very critical that the Peace Fund, in which we have $400 million, that the Commission and the PRC, get to the compromise situation where that money could be used for peace on the continent. So far, only the interest of the 400 millions are used. And I'm really shameful when I say, DRC have been given 1 million for peace, issues through this fund. And they have given to, another country 1.5 million. It has to change. We need the authority from the member countries so that we can use this money, the $400 million, to keep peace on our continent. There are so many other bottlenecks that needs to be handled very quickly. But money is one of them. The Peace and Security Council mission is the second problem. And then we have a third one. This one also has to be underlined very, very seriously. When a crisis happens, I give you the example of Somalia. I've been around for some time. I've been dealing with this problem for many years. When there is no unity of purpose between the countries around this country, neighboring countries, this country will never stand on its feet. That's what we are experiencing today in the Sudan. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions displaced. Neighboring countries are still fighting on the Sudan, and the African Union and IGAD are watching.
Sorry, sir, your time is up.
Okay, sorry, because I can talk hours about this
No
issue.
problem, sir. Thank you so much for your contribution. And ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, especially to our esteemed candidates, if you go beyond the time, I will be forced to interrupt, and I don't want to do that, so please forgive me. May we kindly have our last candidate, His Excellency Randir Mandrato, to respond to the question. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Faire taire les armes et
Silencing the guns and issues relating to peace and security in general actually are due to so many things. It's not like turning on a switch or switching it off, not on and off a switch. No, there are several factors that have to be taken into consideration, and that is the reason why the African continent and the African Union have been challenges to silence the guns. But we have to resolve our conflicts peacefully, and this is one of the principles of the African Union, just like the principle of non-interference. So this is an aspect that we all have to actually look at. When exactly do we talk about non-interference, non-indifference, and how do we use them to silence the guns? But that is the situation in which we find ourselves in. And if I am chosen by the heads of states and government as chairperson of the commission, I will make sure that the African Union Commission would actually work towards resolving our conflicts peacefully, because we have that in the Constitutive Act of Africa, of the African Union. So we have the Peace and Security Council, we have the Peace Architecture of the African Union, but we also have the United Nations Security Council. And then bilaterally, we've got efforts that are underway, and we've heard about progress in some areas, in some regions where we have long-standing conflicts. And then we also have the opportunity of ensuring that there is solidarity with the United Nations, the African Union and the United Nations. This is a framework that could actually enable us to sit down with the international community and talk about crisis in Africa. Why should we only talk about the crisis in Ukraine? Why not talk about the crisis in Sudan and crisis in other African countries? So we are talking about financing peace missions, but there is also a program that actually wants to see the program of the United Nations, that is the SDGs, aligned with Agenda 2063. And then we also have the 10-year plan of our public institutions in charge of working at a national level, but we are talking about the justice systems in our respective countries. Now, concerning the 2 permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, I think here in Africa, we all know the importance and the urgency of having these 2 seats. And we have to seize this opportunity because we are actually at the end of 2024. And so we have to act very fast in 2025. And this should be the mantra of the African Union in 2025. And so, of course, we have to make sure that we can actually speak with one voice on the choice of who will represent Africa on the United Nations Security Council. It's not going to be easy. It will be up to the heads of states to decide who will be the continent's representative. And I will conclude to say that, like this morning, I read in the newspapers the problem between Ethiopia and Somalia, and this was being resolved by Turkey. The mediator is Turkey. Let us be responsible. Let us be serious. The African Union should be that person doing the mediation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, candidate from Madagascar. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our second round. And without any transition, we are going to step into the third round, and we are going to discover the question. Anita, you have the floor.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move into the third round. Once again, if you're just joining us, these questions have been formulated by an independent panel, and the questions will be open and seen only at the beginning of the round, as I'm doing right now. Esteemed candidates, on the topic of reviving Pan-Africanism and countering external influence, Pan-Africanism is declining, and external powers and internal divisions challenge Africa's integration efforts. What specific steps will you take to rekindle the spirit of Pan-Africanism, counter big power politics on the continent, mobilize African countries behind a common integration agenda, ensure resource self-reliance, and position regional economic communities at the center of this process?
Cher candidat,
Distinguished candidates, your question is as follows in French.
l'africanisme est en déclin et les puissances extérieures et les divisions internes remettent en cause les efforts d'intégration en Afrique. Quelles mesures spécifiques comptez-vous prendre pour raviver l'esprit du panafricanisme contre la politique des grandes puissances sur le continent, mobiliser les pays africains derrière un programme d'intégration commun, assurer l'autonomie en matière de ressources et positionner également les communautés économiques régionales au centre de ce processus? Et nous allons commencer tout de suite avec le candidat.
And we will start with the candidate of Djibouti to provide his answer. You have 4 minutes. First and foremost, we have to understand that we are living in a world which is multipolarized world. This is a world that is actually multipolarized, and this world would not provide space for a continent or countries that do not have the right economies, the military strength, the capacity that is required, and mostly that continent or country that is not on the world stage. This is a reality. So what can we do? What should we do? I think it is very important that the Global South should actually take action. And in the Global South, it is Africa that actually has to stand out. And how is Africa going to stand out? If we do not represent much in terms of global trade, you cannot actually sit around a table where decisions are being taken for the destiny of the world. And so integration is, I would say, an obligation, is a must. When we talk about obligation, it is important that the AFCFTA should actually be functional. It is important that intra-Africa trade be developed, and it should go beyond 18%. It is important that African countries should actually use their own resources. And so Africa has now a seat on the G20 table. We want to congratulate South Africa for chairing the G20 next year. And so it is important that the African Union Commission should be working hand in hand with the African Union to actually make sure that Agenda 2063 is a priority item on the agenda of Agenda 2063 of the G20. Africa has to be also on the UN Security Council. Just imagine 80% of the issues discussed at the UN Security Council is African problems. When we talk about security issues, who do we talk about? Africa. When we talk about food insecurity, we also hear Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. They have actually been victims of natural disasters, but we are not the ones polluting the world. So the African Union should also be fully involved in the COP discussions. The COP discussions should also be held here in Africa. So a strong Africa has to be an Africa that is present on the global stage. We have to see that Africa has to be part and parcel of the global south, and this is what we have to do. And I'm going to make sure that our commission is going to work to ensure that Africa is part of the global south. Integration is a long-winded effort. It goes through solidarity. We are not working among ourselves. We are not speaking to one another as neighbors. We'd rather trade with non-African countries because we have non-tariff barriers, because our currencies are not convertible. Our currencies are not convertible. If I want to trade in birr with Ethiopia, and Ethiopia wants to trade in francs, definitely there is loss of money. So we should have a payment and compensation system in Africa. We have to mobilize resources between 5 and 10 billion so that this compensation system is functional. Are we going to have a single currency in Africa? Why not? That is possible.
Your Excellency Randy Mandrato, it's your turn, sir. 4 minutes.
Je ne pense pas.
Well, I do not think that Pan-Africanism is actually dying out. No, because Pan-Africanism is in us. We are Pan-Africanists. You cannot erase the history of this continent, the history which also includes the efforts of our diaspora. So Pan-Africanism is really not dying in Africa. It is true that we all have a huge responsibility. The current generation that we have to work to make sure that the future generation should not forget what our founding fathers actually had in mind when they were establishing the OAU, so that all those who are in Africa should continue to live the same dream the same dream. We inherited this continent from our founding fathers, and we have the Africa that we want. The Africa that we see is the Africa where we live in, and the Africa that we want is the Africa that we want to prepare and which we must prepare. And so there is a clear difference between the Africa in which we are and the African Union, which is our own home, the common house. And if the African Union Commission does not put in the right resources, the human resources and the financial resources, even the diplomats and the military, we will not get to where we want to be. And so I am of the opinion that it all depends on the will of the people to go beyond the challenges that we face today. We all know the problems of our African Union today. There are certain aspects that do not meet the expectations of the people. For example, the SACA audit that was prepared by experts proposing reforms that have to be undertaken. We also have reforms that were undertaken in 2016. So we need to undertake those reforms to ensure that the African Union can actually rise to the challenges. The regional economic communities also have a role to play. I went to COMESA for several years and actually saw the efforts undertaken by countries of COMESA and East Africa. And we see Tunisia, Egypt, in COMESA as well. And this will continue. We have the Abuja Treaty actually defined gradual integration at the regional level and then continental level. And I know we will get there. And I am going to work with the members of the next commission so that together we can actually make all of this easy. And lastly, I think we should also bear in mind, we should also think about the military bases, the foreign military bases in Africa, in African countries. Some countries have already started to take their own destiny in their hands in terms of their security. We should be brave enough, we should actually have that courage to make sure that we can actually stand out there as adults that can actually take their destiny in their own hands. Foreign military bases in Africa, we do hope that in a few years' time, those military bases will be a thing of the past, because these military bases are actually a source of conflict. Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellency Randram Mandriato, candidate of Madagascar. Now we listen to Raila Amolo Odinga, candidate of Kenya.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the inter-African trade, which today stands just at 15%. Inter-European trade, on the other hand, stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade stands at 60%. Africa trades more with the external world than with itself, wasting a lot of resources. Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here, we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people. And that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized their economy, the manufacturing unit in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there was cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor. Secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drag to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youth drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because you have not created conditions that can retain them here. Now we are saying that we want to create a situation where every African youth must be connected to the internet and using the artificial intelligence and information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth, and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent so that Africa moves.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Raila Odinga, finishing us on the third round. And now we move into the fourth and final round, and I give my sister the opportunity to open the envelope and tell us what the first or the last question rather is. And ladies and gentlemen, as a form of a reminder, after this we have a quick break, and after the break each of our esteemed candidates will have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks. Fatima?
Dear candidates, your question is this one. The implementation of the key reforms at the African Union that were decided by the Assembly of Heads of State and Government has come to a standstill, and which has a negative impact on the structural stability and the financial viability of the Union, and also on the lack of the African Union to have an impact. Were you to become the chairperson, what new approaches would you adopt to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, rationalize the programs of the African Union, and strengthen its effectiveness in the long term?
Under the topic of implementing of reforms agreed under the Assembly Decision 635, the implementation of key African Union reforms decided by the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments has stalled, with an adverse impact on its structural viability and financial sustainability, and the AU's focus on a high or a few high-impact public goods. If you become chairperson, what new approaches will you introduce to reinvigorate the implementation of these reforms, streamline the AU's agenda, and strengthen its long-term effectiveness?
Et j'invite à présent le candidat.
I'd like to invite the candidate from Madagascar to respond first. First of all, we have to begin by bringing back order to our shared home, the African Union. I think this is the highest priority. The mandate of the chairperson of the commission as a whole is lasts 4 years. So that is a very short period of time to be able to change from top to bottom what needs to be changed in terms of institutional reforms of the African Union. So one must begin by bringing back order. I did mention a short while ago the recommendations of the SACA audit. I also mentioned the reforms that have already been proposed in 2016. There would be other reforms. What needs to be done were I to become the chairperson of the union would be to review the documents, and one cannot forget history. One cannot ignore history. I don't think we could. We are at the end of a process. We are at the beginning of a new process, and the outgoing team did what they were able to do with the resources that they had at their disposal. And I would like to thank the outgoing chairperson of the commission, Mr. Faki, and his entire team. And were I to be elected chairperson of the commission, I would work, of course, with the chairperson, because it would be a lady chairperson. Now, these reforms have to be prioritized. There are reforms at the level of the financing of the African Union. There are reforms in terms of mobilization of strategic partnerships. There are, of course, issues that have to do with the effectiveness in the area of peace and security. So we have to prioritize the reforms. Yet, once again, 4 years is too short a period of time. It is therefore important to review objective by objective. Strategic objective is what I mean of the 10-year plan 2024-2032. And since it was my responsibility in COMESA, one can perhaps plan for strategic planning over perhaps 2-3 years, which strategic planning would make it possible for us to identify the urgent issues and to align the financing of these issues. The 10-year plan does not allow one to do this. And maybe were we to have a strategic plan, we could perhaps be more specific and address the matters that need to be addressed urgently in the way of reforms. And I also think, as I said a short while ago, that the organs of the African Union, beginning with the Conference of Heads of State and Government, but also the committee of the PRC, the Permanent Representatives Committee, with the Pan-African Parliament and the other organs, all the organs of the African Union, should agree on the speed they should work at, so that at the end of the day, the reforms become visible, become tangible, and that the citizens of the continent can appreciate the effectiveness of a new effective of the new African Union led by a new team. Thank you.
And now I yield the microphone to you, Excellency Raila Odinga. 4 minutes, sir.
Well, we know where we are as African Union, and that's why the heads of state came up with that committee on reforms, which was headed by former president, current Rwanda President Kagame. The chairmanship has now been passed over to Honorable William Ruto, President of Kenya. I have had long discussions with President Kagame when he was chairing that committee, because I was working as a high representative of the AU on issues of infrastructure. And I know the kind of frustrations that you feel working that way. I know that 93% of the resolutions that are passed by the heads of state at the assembly are never implemented. Now, there's some of them are resolutions which were probably not necessary. Some of them are not implementable, but majority of them are just not implemented. Some have to do with the structure and management of the AU at the headquarters. I'm not trying to pass any judgment here because I know that Mr. Faki has worked very hard to try to make the organization move forward. The other one has been the issue of funding, which has been a major challenge, and look at other alternative sources of funding. When I was there as high rep on infrastructure development, we came up with a proposal to set up an infrastructure fund for Africa, and using the African resources, because many of African countries have got a lot of money in sovereign funds, from which the AU can actually borrow without having to pay so much high interest. And this will help AU actually to spearhead the process of constructing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned the Trans-African Railway Network, Lagos to Cairo, the high speed. Then you have got Beira in Mozambique to Lobito in Angola and Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have got the LAPSET, which will come from Lamu in Kenya, running through South Sudan, Central Africa to Caribbean Cameroon, to create a land bridge that opens the interior of Africa and gives these landlocked countries in the continent access to the sea. So some of these are possible, but we need to think out of the box and ensure that most of these reforms which are being proposed are implemented. We were talking about energy, which is a very major issue. And we have got the Grand Inga in the Congo, which can actually power the entire continent with power pools, southern power pool, eastern power pool, central, western, and northern power pool. That will help us to lower the cost of energy in the continent. That would be a revolutionary change on the continent. Then you've got the connectivity, fiber optic connectivity, open skies, opening up the skies for movement of people. And then visas, to do visas are a big issue. Many African businessmen cannot travel across the continent without, because they don't have visas.
Excellency, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Les 4 minutes se sont écoulées. Nous allons maintenant suivre.
We are going now to listen to the response from the last candidate for this round, the candidate from Djibouti.
Let me start by paying tribute to our heads of states who have endorsed those reforms in 2017. And then the champion for those reforms was His Excellency President Kagame, and he passed the responsibility to President Ruto. Now, there are a number of reforms that have already been implemented. We have to recognize that. The size of the commission We had 10 commissioners, chairperson, deputy chairperson, and 8 commissioners, and it has been reduced. We have what we call a golden rule in terms of managing the staff and the personnel. I'm still waiting for the SACA program to be implemented. I hope that this hot potato will not wait for us, one of us, when we'll be elected. But I hope that the SACA process will be implemented. It is about the personnel, the staff. We have moved from a lot of short contract employees to a permanent contract. That's very important. If you want to create loyalty, you want to create the ownership within your staff and personnel, you have to make them happy. They need to have a permanent contract, and it is in the SACA program. Now, the biggest bottleneck of the reforms is the financing. Our heads of state said we will pay 0.2% of eligible import to the Commission. Only 17 countries, 17, are applying and abiding by that rule. It has to change. I'm not going to impose that on our leaders. It's not my intention, but I will advocate for it. It's very important to have, that particular issue of mobilizing and fostering financing be resolved immediately. Then our experts, there is a unit in the African Union Commission called the Reform Unit, led by Mr. Makoko, a very able African expert. But there are so many reforms that have not been implemented. One of them is PAP, the Pan-African Parliament. It's still a consultative organ. When is the Pan-African Parliament will become a legislative organ? They have passed in 2014 a protocol. Only 15 countries ratified that protocol. And this is one of the major reforms that we have to implement. Then we have on the judicial sector, the Court of Justice, the Commission of Human Rights. Sometimes they are fighting on issues. The Court of Justice do not open its doors to nationals, to African citizens, to NGOs. They are complaining. I am hearing complaints about the African citizens with regard to the Court of Justice. And then they are fighting who is doing what, the Commission of Human Rights. These reforms have to be implemented. And the Bureau of Liaison, a liaison bureau, we have so many on the continent. That's double use of those bureaus. Time is running, time is flying. So we have to rationalize. How can you imagine that you have 3 bureaus in the same region? And we're saying we should have the golden rules for management. And whenever we want to touch one of the bureaus, it's a political matter. It's useless, but it is a political matter. The country that is hosting the bureau is saying, you won't touch it. It has to change. It needs leadership. It needs understanding, negotiation, but it has to change. If we want to change things, we have to be frank and outspoken. We have to be, really tough when it comes to be tough, and lean when it comes to we have to do it. We have to do it.
Yes, sir, your time is up. And now, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of round 4. If you are just joining us, we've had 4 rounds, and each of them has touched on a thematic area. And now we will go for a quick break. When we come back, the candidates each have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous remercions bien.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank our dear candidates for having responded to the last question of the 4th round of this Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate of the African Union. Thank you very much for staying with us. We'll come back in a few minutes. We're going to take another short break. And after the break, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their closing remarks. See you in a short while.
Ladies and 3, 4, 5. Ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and 3, 2. Hello. 1, 2.
Mesdames et messieurs, merci beaucoup.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming back with us. So we're going to reconvene in a few minutes for the closure of the Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate of the African Union. Thank you very much for having joined us this evening.
Last part of our programming this evening. Please take your seats. Thank you. May we assemble all our candidates, please. As we proceed into the last part of our debate today, Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024. And we want to say a special thank you to our audience around the world. The questions you sent truly informed the kinds of questions that we then asked our panel here. And we are very happy that you were very involved. It goes to show that indeed the Africa we want is in your hands and that you are actively involved in doing this together. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are back to our last session. My name is Anita Erskine, and I'm joined here by my colleague Fatima Sharif, who is our French speaker.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Anita. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us for this final lap of the Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate of the African Union. You have listened during the debate, the questions that were raised, the answers that were given by the different candidates, and we're coming to the end of the debate. And so, Anita, we're going to listen to the closing remarks to the candidates. So thank you very much, Fatima.
Candidates, you each have 2 minutes to share your closing remarks, or better still, your last words. We will start this round with His Excellency Raila Odinga.
Thank you. I am delighted to have had the opportunity to address our people of Africa. And as I've said, I am ready to work for Africa. There are reforms that will be necessary so that AU can work more effectively. One of these reforms will be financial reforms, so that we are able to bring in the African private sector into the funding. I mentioned also the issue of sovereign funds that we can use. We can create a fund that will enable AU to do all its money work. Then there's issue of 0.2% of the duty, which only 17 countries are remitting. I will work to ensure that all the countries could pay their dues to the Union. This is what happens in the European Union, and that's why European Union is able to even fund African Union. It's a shame. If we can be able to fund this organization out of our own resources on the continent, and this is what I'm going to try to do. And I said that I am ready on day one when I'm appointed. I will not need any kind of induction. I'm ready to work for the continent, and I will offer my best. The days of Africa have come. African lion will begin to roar and tell its Asian tiger counterpart and the European bear and the American jaguar that this is going to be Africa's millennium. the 2000.
Dear candidate, I'm
21.
really sorry to interrupt you once again, but
It's
these are the
African-
rules of the debate.
African year.
Nous allons maintenant, mesdames et
We are going now, ladies and gentlemen, give 2 minutes to the candidate of Djibouti closing remarks.
Thank you so much, and let me speak in Arabic. I would like to say that if I will be elected as the chair of the African Union Commission, I will be up to your aspirations and I will defend the interest of our continent, and I will work diligently to defend our continent, and with the full modesty, I think that I deserve it.
Je souhaite à nos pays, à nos peuples africains
So I wish for our African people, our countries, a very happy 2025.
tonight. I wish to all African nations and citizens all the best. Thank you for your support.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now, 2 minutes for you, His Excellency Richard J. Randemandrato.
En 2025,
In 2025, there will be a new team that will be leading for 4 years. Will be leading the African Union Commission for 4 years, and there shall be 8 high-level public servants like most of us, and we shall be the ones to continue with the reforms. We shall be a united team, a team that will have the team spirit to continue in the implementation of the 10-year plan of Agenda 2063. I do regret that this evening we're not able to handle subjects that are so urgent because we did not have enough time. Issues such as public health, the debt, issues of financing and financial institutions of the African Union, questions that have to do with the participation of the civil society and the diaspora, the questions that are linked to information and digital technology. I'm sorry we did not have time to deal with those issues, but on another, we shall have other opportunities, and I shall be able to make my modest contribution. Like in public sport, there have to be players, and there have to be those who choose, who select the players. Those who select the heads of state. It is up to them to select the team that will lead the African Union Commission for their need. We need a leader. Men and women need a leader, and I hope that in 2025, the wisdom of heads of state and government will balance the team that will win, so that the Africa that we want can continue to win the battle for sustainable development. Thank you. Thank you very much for these closing remarks that have been made by the different candidates.
Candidates, ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of applause for our esteemed candidates. Tonight, we have heard from His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, Foreign Affairs Minister Djibouti. We've also heard from His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister of Kenya. We've also heard from His Excellency Richard J. Randemandrato, who is the former Foreign Affairs Minister of Madagascar. Each one of our candidates has done an exceptional job talking about the thematic areas that were set before them. We've talked about advancing economic integration. We've talked about promoting peace and security as well as democracy, Africa's place in global affairs, and reforming the African Union, amongst many. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute honor bringing you Mjadala Africa Leadership Debate 2024.
Merci infiniment.
Thank you very much, Anisha. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the Mjadala Leadership Debate